Okay, so today we're going to be continuing with functions, and I think I went pretty fast over some of the concepts yesterday, so if you have any doubts about any concept, just ask them today in the chat. Okay, so the first problem that we're going to do is hanging out on the terrace. So the input is first two numbers, okay? So 4, in this case, the first number, is the maximum number of people that are allowed to be on the terrace at the same time, okay? Like the capacity of the terrace. And 5 is your number of inputs, okay? This is 5. And then you have these enter 3, leave 1, and so on. So what these mean is enter 3 means 3 people are entering the terrace. Initially, there are 0 people on the terrace. And enter 3 means 3 people are entering the terrace. And then we have enter 2. So if you see 3 plus 2 is 5, it's greater than the capacity of the terrace, which is 4. So this group won't be allowed to enter because they'll exceed the capacity. So we'll increment our count by 1 because we are counting the total number of groups that were not allowed to enter the terrace. Okay? And then you just repeat that for the rest of the inputs. So one person leaves here. So now the number of people on the terrace is 3 minus 1, 2. One person enters again, so it becomes 2 plus 1, 3. And then 2 people try to enter again, but since we already have 3, 3 plus 2 is 5, and that's greater than the capacity. So one more group is not allowed to enter. So that's why our sample output is 2. Okay? So, is everyone able to understand this question? I can see some questions here. Explain the return statement and refresh functions and methods. So I'll just do that really quickly. Let's see. Okay, I'll show you with this calculator example. Okay, so a method and a function are both just a named sequence of statements. This is the name and this is the sequence of statements. Okay, and it's performing some task. That's all the method is. The same thing applies for functions. Okay, and for now, just remember that the difference is for methods we have the dot operator and for functions we don't. There are other differences which will come up later, okay? For now, you can just focus on this difference if you want. And for the return statement, so here you can see that I'm calling apply operator in my print, okay? Suppose I have x is equal to this apply operator. I'll change this to z because I already have a variable called x. So this return statement is basically returning the result of the computation of this function, okay? This function performs some operations, maybe addition, maybe division, so on. And it's returning the final result, okay? So it's giving back the result to this z, okay? That's what return statement means. It means give back the result of the function and assign it to this variable in this case. Okay, so back to this question. Did everyone understand it? Okay, I'll just explain it again. So we have a terrace capacity. That's the first input, 4. Okay, we can't have more than 4 people on the terrace at any time. And 5 is just the number of inputs after that. So our first input is enter 3. Okay, that means 3 people are entering our terrace. And initially there are 0 people on the terrace. So now the count of people on the terrace will be 3 because of this line. Then we have enter 2. So 3 plus 2 is 5. We already have 3 people on our terrace. If 2 more try to enter, we'll have 5. And 5 exceeds our capacity, right? Because our capacity is 4. So this group won't be allowed to enter the terrace, okay? So the number of groups not allowed to enter the terrace so far will be 1 up till this point. And the number of people currently on the terrace will be 3. Then one person leaves the terrace. So now the number of people on the terrace becomes 3 minus 1, which is 2. Then one more person enters. So 2 plus 1, 3 again. And then one more group of 2 people tries to enter the terrace. Since we again have 3 people, 3 plus 2 is 5, that exceeds the capacity. So this group is also not allowed to enter the terrace. So this group is not allowed to enter, this group is not allowed to enter. So our output is 2 because 2 groups are not allowed to enter. Okay, so did everyone understand this question? And if you did, can you try telling me how you would solve it? Just the logic is fine. You don't need to actually write the code right now.
Ma'am, we actually have a question asking us if the parameters given in input are actually necessary to type out the program.
So you definitely need 4. I'm not sure if exactly what you're
no,
asking.
ma'am, that's not what they meant. If you scroll up a bit, you will actually see the p-value having that, the L value, the X value, and the p value in between certain parameters. Are those necessary towards the solution of the program?
Okay, So that is not necessary for your solution, but this is kind of just to cover some edge cases, okay? So that, sometimes if you ask questions like, what if P is 0 or what if L is 0? That's why they've given this, okay? Otherwise, you will have to validate your input. So this is just a way of saying you don't need to validate your input because these conditions will always be true. You don't have to consider it when you're writing your program as such because it's not really relevant to us in most cases. Okay, does anyone have any sort of steps that they would follow? And how would you divide this code into functions, do you think? What would be the different tasks or the different modules? Okay, so just to be clear, you don't have to use functions for this if it was just a general example. Because I'm showing you examples with functions, I'd prefer it if you used functions. It's not mandatory to use them in an actual real-world example if you were doing this. Okay, I can see a good answer here, which says leave function and enter function. That's good. Okay, a lot of you are saying enter and exit, leave and enter. Those are the 2 functions. That's really good. I'm not sure what I've done. Let's see that. So let's move to the solution now. And there's like no fixed rules about what has to go in the function, okay? It can be whatever you feel acts as one task. Like I just have one function overall, but you can split it into 2 different functions, one for enter, one for leave if you want. That's up to you. I just have one function to update the number of people on the terrace. That's all. Okay. So what I'm doing is I'm taking my input, okay, the maximum capacity and the total number of inputs, okay, and then I'm converting them to integers. I'm setting a result variable to 0 and a current variable to 0. So result is my final result, how many groups were not allowed to enter the terrace, and current is the current number of people on the terrace, okay? And then again, I'm taking the input within a loop, okay? So action, which is leave or enter, and number, which is the number of people entering or leaving. And then I'm calling my function, okay? So my function is just checking terrace, okay? So it is returning the number of groups that were made to leave the terrace, okay? Which is going to be a maximum of 1 in each case. And the current number of people on the terrace, okay? That's what my check terrace function is updating. So I'm calling check terrace with the action, which is leave or enter, number, which is the number of people in that input, maximum, which is the capacity of the terrace, and current, which is the current number of people on the terrace, okay? And I've done it this way so that I can show you that you can have many parameters here, okay? And that you can return many values. You can have it with two separate functions, one for leave, one for enter. That's really good too, okay? So within the function, I'm just checking I'm setting my result to 0 first, okay? That's the number of groups that are leaving the terrace. And then I'm saying if my action is enter, I check if my current number of people plus the number of people trying to enter exceeds maximum, okay? And if it does, I'm setting my result to 1. Now over here, I can also just have return 1 and current if I want, okay? I don't have to have a result variable. And otherwise, if it's less than or equal to the capacity, I'm just incrementing the total number of people currently on the terrace, okay? So this is a nested if-else. And then here in my outer if-else, if it's a leave action, I'm just subtracting the number from my current. And then at the end, I'm returning result, which is going to be either 1 or 0, always, and current, which is always going to be updated based on whether people entered or left. Okay, so were you able to understand this? Did I go too fast? I can see a question, should it be result plus equal to 1? That's fine too, it doesn't make a difference because like if you see this, at most one group at a time for each input can be not allowed to enter the terrace, right? And we're calling this function for each input. So this result will either be 0 or 1 always. So even if you put plus equal to 1, it's going to be fine. There's no problem there. I'll just explain this again, I think. Okay, so this part, I think all of you understood. I'll start from the for loop, okay? So for index in range of count means go through this, okay? I'm taking in these inputs, okay? And I'm getting the action, which is either leave or enter, and I'm getting the number, that is this number 3, 2, 1, and so on, okay? So I'm taking in the input first, and then I'm calling my check terrace function, okay? So what this check terrace function is supposed to do is tell me how many groups, if any, are made to leave the terrace, okay, for this input. So this will either be 0 or 1, okay? And it will also return the current number of people on the terrace after this input, okay? So it's doing two things basically, okay? It's getting the number of groups that were not allowed to enter and the number of people on the terrace after this operation. And it's being called for each of these, okay? So I'm calling it with action. Action is one argument because I need to know whether it was a leave or an enter action. I'm calling it with number, which was the number of people who tried to enter or leave the terrace, okay? Because that's needed too to compute the current number of people on the terrace. I'm calling it with capacity or maximum because I need that to check if the groups are allowed to enter the terrace. And with current, because that's the current number of people on the terrace. I use it to update my number of people on the terrace, okay? Okay, let me just run this once. Okay, so you can see the output is 2, okay? So I will just show you for maybe the first two, okay? So let's say enter 3 is what's happening now. Okay, so we're here, enter 3, and we are at here. We are at this line, okay? So action is equal to enter, number is equal to 3, Okay. And now I'm calling check terrace. Okay. With action, which is going to be leave, number, which is going to be 3, maximum, which is going to be 4, the capacity, which I took as input earlier, and current, which is going to be 0 because this is my first loop iteration and I'm initializing current to 0 before my loop starts. Okay. So now I've called this function with these values. Let me just move this up. Okay. So now we come to this function. Now, so my result is 0. Result is whether a group is being made to leave the terrace or not. Okay. And it's going to be 0 or 1 because at each step, at each iteration, only one group is entering at a time, right? Only one input means one group. And that group can either enter or leave or not enter. Sorry. They can either enter or not be allowed to enter. So this leave count here, which is result over here, is going to be either 0 or 1. Okay. So my result is 0 in the beginning and my action is enter. So I come into this condition. Okay. So is my current plus number greater than maximum? Is current, which is 0, that's what I sent, plus number, which was 3, greater than maximum, which is 4. So is 0 plus 3 greater than 4? And it's not. So it will increment my current. Okay, so now current is equal to 0 plus int of number, and number was 3. So 0 plus 3 is equal to 3. Okay, so now there's 3 people on my terrace and result is still 0. It remains 0 because this group was allowed to enter the terrace. So I'm returning result and current. I'm returning 0 and 3. And this is the number of people on my terrace right now, 3. How many groups were made to leave, were not allowed to enter the terrace? Okay, 0. So is this first iteration clear? Is anyone still having doubts about the first iteration? Okay, I think that's clear. So now let me show you a case when a group is not allowed to enter. That's the second input. Okay, so now I come back here. Okay, rather I come here first because my function returned leave count and current as 0 and 3. So leave count becomes 0, current becomes 3, and result plus equal to leave count. So it just remains 0 since I returned 0. Okay, and my current is now 3. Okay, it's not 0 anymore. So when I come in here and then when I call check terrace again, my current is going to be 3. The input to this function this time is going to be 3. Okay, so let me show you. So this time in my second input, action is equal to enter again, number is equal to 2. Okay, that's here. And now I'm calling check terrace with action as enter, number as 2, maximum is 4, and current is 3 this time because I returned 3 last time. Okay, and I updated it here in the return value. Okay, and now in my function, my action is enter again, my result is 0, my action is enter, and I come in here, I check is my current plus number greater than maximum. Is current, which is 3, plus number, which is 2, greater than maximum, which is 4. And this time it is. So now I set result to 1. I come in here. Okay. And none of this executes because they're all else conditions. So I just return result and current. There's no change to current in this case, right? But result is 1 because this group was not allowed to enter. So this time when I come here, leave count becomes 1 and current remains 3 because I'm returning, let me write that, return 1, 3. Okay, so now leave count is 1, current is 3 and result plus equal to leave count. So result becomes 1. Okay, so this process just keeps repeating. Okay. Okay, I saw a question for the 29th line. I'm not sure if you meant before or after the comment. Okay, that wasn't the 29 before. I'm not sure if this is the line that you meant, but I'm just converting it to an integer. That's all. Okay, I can see a good question here. Are parameters and arguments the same? So these are called parameters, okay? What you have in the function definition, this is called the function definition, okay? And these are called parameters, okay? So parameters are basically just placeholders, okay? They're just variable names, kind of. Just think of them like that. They don't have any values by themselves, okay? You have to pass values into them. If you don't give them values, then there's nothing they can do, okay? Without values, they're meaningless. They're just names. They're placeholders, okay? That's the best way to describe them. And over here, we have arguments here, okay? When we call the function with some actual values, these values are called the arguments, okay? The actual values. So these can be variables which have values, or they can be actual numbers or strings or whatever you want, okay? But these are the actual values that you're passing into your function. Okay, so that's the difference between arguments and parameters. 35th line. Okay, I'll explain this again. So my function is returning two things, okay? It's returning result, which is whether or not this group was made to leave or not enter the terrace, and current, which is the current number of people on the terrace after executing each of these actions. Okay, so when I return two values from a function, you can see I have two variables here. So the first return value, result, goes into leave count. The second return value, current, goes into current over here. And the name doesn't have to be the same, okay? It can be any name in here. Okay, so
ma'am, we have two questions. The first question is whether the leave count is actually initially 0, and the second question is for you to explain line 35 another time.
Okay, so leave count, it's just a variable. Like even if I set leave count to 0 here, it doesn't make a difference, okay? It's kind of like creating a variable here, let's say, in our calculator example, if you remember, I'm not sure if I did it that way, but basically it's just like assigning a value to a variable directly using the function, okay? You don't need to have an initial value for it in that case. If you want to have one, you can, but it's not necessary, okay? It's like you're creating the variable here itself, like how we have action and number here. Okay, you're creating the variable here and you're assigning it here itself in this function call. And okay, what line 35 is doing, it's calling the function. Okay, I hope you understand what's happening inside the function. And the function is returning two values, result and current. So it's assigning the first return value to leave count and the second return value to current. Okay. So any more questions?
Ma'am, we have a question which is basically, can we use get function to avoid error thrown in the console?
Where do you want to use get?
That has not been mentioned in the question, ma'am.
Okay. Okay, so I'm just going to move on, and if that's clarified later, I can answer it. Okay. So this question is very simple. It's just saying you are given 3 numbers as input, okay? I mean, you have first the number of inputs, and then you have to loop through that and get the 3 numbers as input, okay? So 3 numbers, R, E, and C, okay? If R is less than E minus C, you have to print advertise. If R is equal to E minus C, you print does not matter. And if R is greater than E minus C, you print do not advertise. That's all, okay? In terms of the question, this is supposed to be revenue if you don't advertise, in case you want to know. This is, I think, revenue if you do advertise. And this is cost of advertising, in case you wanted to know what they mean. I'll just keep it open to this question. Does anyone want to say how they would divide this code into functions? I'll just repeat this once more. So you have 3 inputs, okay? That's the first thing. I mean, they can give any number of inputs that you have to take as input first. That's n, okay? And then you have to loop through that, the number of inputs that you will get, and you have to take in each iteration 3 variables, okay? R, E, and C. So if first one is R, second one is E, third one is C. So if R is less than E minus C, you print advertise. If R is equal to E minus C, you print does not matter. If R is greater than E minus C, you print do not advertise. And yes, you'll be using if and else if, but let's see if you can divide this into functions. I know all of you can do the looping and the if part. That's great. We're trying to focus on the functions part of it right now. Okay, I can see an answer. Check whether to advertise. That's good. Okay, I think a couple of you have got it now. Okay, so let me move on to the solution. Okay, so I've used a function here because we're working on functions, but you don't necessarily have to use a function to solve this problem, okay? Just in case you had that question. So I'm taking in my input, the number of test cases first. I'm creating a result variable and setting it to empty. And, then I'm going to loop through that, loop through count. I'm going to get my input as REC, convert them to integers, and then I'm going to call my function which checks my revenue, okay? So check revenue has R, E, and C as arguments, and I've put the same names as the parameters also. And here I'm checking is R equal to E minus C, and I'm returning directly what the result should be, okay? Does not matter, do not advertise, advertise. I'm returning it directly based on the conditions. And you can see I've not used else here because return statement directly exits the function, okay? So I don't need to have an else because once this return is executed, for example, it won't come into these lines at all, okay? And you can see I've put \n, this escape sequence, at the end of each string because I want to print a new line at the end of each string, okay? All my answers are on different lines. And here I'm appending my result, this check revenue return value, directly to my result variable, okay? And Any questions about this part so far? Just this, not the last line. Okay, I can see a question, why have I not used else if? So let me just try and show you with an example. So here I'm going to put just a return statement, and I'm going to comment out all of this, and I'll just put some random text here. Okay, doesn't matter. And now I'm going to enter there, which case was this? R is equal to E minus C. Okay, sorry. So let me run this, and let me just enter 1, 100, 130, and 30. Okay, so you can see it's just returning does not matter. It's just printing does not matter. Okay, it's not printing this at all, even though there's no if here, there's no else if here, there's nothing here. Okay, so basically return means exit the function. Okay, stop executing the function and give back this value. So once you exit the function, you don't come back and execute the rest of it unless the function is called again. So if this condition were not true, then we would have this, or in our regular program, we would be checking these conditions, okay? But since return exits the function, I don't need to have an else over here, okay? You can have one, there's no harm, but it's not needed. Okay, so did everyone understand this much? I can see a question, can we use nested if? I'm not sure where you want to use the nested if, but if you want to put your code, I can tell you whether we can use nested if or not. Okay, and I can see one more question. Why are we using underscore here? That's just because we're not using this variable. Okay, so now I'll just explain this line. So you can see I'm appending an extra new line escape sequence, new line character at the end of each result, right? At the end of each return statement. So if I remove this part and I just run this, sorry. You can see there's going to be an extra new line at the end of my input, okay? So for Catis, this may not be a problem. For other systems or other websites, it may or may not be accepted. So it's usually good to give them the exact result that they want, okay? So there is an extra new line here because we're appending a new line each time we're returning some result. So to remove that extra new line at the end, I've used this built-in method rstrip, okay? And what rstrip does is it strips something from the right side of my string, okay? It's a built-in method that's changing this string, this result string, and it's removing whatever I've specified it should remove from the right side of my string, okay? And you can also have left strip if you want to remove something from the start of your string. That's fine too. Okay, in this case, we want to remove the extra new line at the end, at the right side. So we're using rstrip. Okay. I think this is what I had. Yeah. Okay, so I want to remove the extra new line from the end of my result. So I'm using rstrip. Okay, any questions? And there are other ways to remove this last character. It's just that I'm showing you the function or method example in this case. That's why I've used this. Okay, so I'm going to move on. So this is a HackerRank question, and this is a really straightforward question. They're just saying they have given you a year as input, okay? You just have to say whether it's a leap year or not. Sorry, I'm showing you the solution. You just have to say whether it's a leap year or not, okay? So can anyone write what the function would be? I'm seeing some people asking me to submit this in Catis. Okay, I'll do that. Let me just open up Catis. So I use the editor directly because I don't want to upload a file. And I just copy paste and submit. Okay, and it says accepted. They only have 2 test cases for this one. Okay, so can anyone tell me how they would do this leap year question? It would be good if you could put the if conditions also for this one. And they've given all the conditions here in the question, what's showing on my screen. A lot of you are putting modulo 4. That is part of it. That's definitely part of it. But if you read the question, that's not the only condition. If you see my screen, there are 3 conditions, right? The first is the year can be evenly divided by 4 unless the year can be divided by 100. And then again, unless it is evenly divisible by 400. So there are 3 conditions here. And there's some nesting also. So can you give me that solution? You can just follow the conditions that are shown in the question. It's too small, okay. Is that better?
Ma'am, we are getting a lot of answers which are nested if and in general if statements.
Okay, that's good. So with HackerRank, they already define the function for you. So we just have to write this part of the function. Okay, but if you're doing it in your own editor or in Replit or something, just write the full code, okay, including the input part and then the function definition. Okay, so the solution is basically this part. Okay, I'm setting some leap variable to false, and I'm doing that because in HackerRank this part is predefined. Okay, this comes as part of the question, and they want us to return true or false. So we have to have return false or return true. Okay, otherwise you could just directly print it here if this wasn't HackerRank. So they're taking the input and they're calling this function with that input, okay, with the year. And we have a variable leap. You can call it whatever you want, is leap year if you want. And it's initialized to false initially, okay. So my first condition is year divisible by 4, okay. If it is, then I'm coming in here. Is my year divisible by 100? Okay, that's the second condition in the question. And if it is divisible by 100 and it's divisible by 4, is it divisible by 400 also? Okay. So if all 3 of these are true, it's returning true. Okay. So that's one case in which it returns true. Now you can see here, if my year mod 4 is 0 and if my year mod 100 is 0 and this condition is false, it's returning false directly. I don't need to have else over here, okay? Can anyone tell me why I don't need to have else over here? Okay, I'm not seeing any answers to that. That's okay. So that's because this return true, if it comes into this and it executes this statement, it exits the function. Like I've told you earlier, return exits the function. Okay, so it won't execute these lines. Okay, so the only case it could ever come to this statement here, is if this is false. Okay, it's like kind of implying the else condition. You don't have to explicitly write it because it can only come here if the condition is false. Okay, only if else is true, if that's how you want to think about it. Okay, so this is one case when it's divisible by 400 and 400. And if it's divisible by 4 and 100, but not by 400, we're returning false. Okay, so again, this is just like writing else return false. Okay, in case you're getting confused, it's the same thing. Okay, and then here we have return true. Okay, so what this is an else. Okay, it won't work because I don't have an else for my inner one, but basically it means if my year mod 100 is not equal to 0 and my year mod 4 is equal to 0, I return true. Okay, and if my year mod 4 is not 0 at all, I definitely return false. Okay, so I don't actually need this variable at all. I can remove it entirely because one of these statements will always be executed. Okay, any questions? I'm seeing a question if we can run this on Catis. So I don't know if this question is there on Catis. That's why I've used HackerRank. Okay, any more questions?
Ma'am, one student has asked, can we use 365 instead of year? I'm not sure about it.
Okay, so year is just an input, okay? Like 1990 or 2000. That's what the year variable is. Okay? Just in case I didn't explain that. Do you need me to run this? Please run it with input 2016, okay? Oh, sorry, I should have put custom input. Oh, I forgot to put the output. Okay. Okay, I can see some questions. Explain the second line. I'm not sure which line. Do you mean the one which is line number 2, or do you mean print statement? And can you explain return statement again? Okay, so I'll just go through return once more. So return exits the function and gives back some value to the code or to whatever called the function. Okay, so let's say I'll show you in Replit, like this one, for example. Okay, so here, let's say I'm returning true. Okay, I'm returning the value true. So you can use that value directly. Okay, you don't have to have a variable assigned to that value and then use that variable. Okay, but just so that you understand, it's the same as writing is valid some variable is equal to validate operator of O, and then if is valid equal to true, or just is valid, both are correct. Okay, so return stops execution of the function at that line and returns some value. Okay, and that value can be used in the code that called the function. So here this code, this variable is the line in which this variable assignment is the line in which we called the function, okay? So the return value, which is true, got assigned to this variable. Suppose I just had directly validate operator of O, then, and I remove this, then I'm calling the validate operator function in this line, in this if statement, okay? So I can use the return value directly here. I don't have to assign it to a variable, okay? Is the space important for 7, 8, 9, 10? Yeah, the indentation here is important because this is the code that executes only if this condition is true. It's the code within this if condition. This is the code within the second if condition, and so on. So the indentation is really important here. Okay, I can see your question. If the fifth line is not equal to 0, then what will it print? Fifth line. Okay, so in this case, you would need to modify the rest of your if conditions also, because this doesn't satisfy what they're asking for. But you can do it that way too if you want. Okay, so I'm going to move on. I think I did this. Yeah. So this is a practice problem that I want you to try. Let me put the link in here. Okay, I know there's other ways to solve the leap year question. Okay, your ways are definitely correct too. I was just showing you one way of doing it. Okay, if you have other solutions, that's great. Okay, so this is a practice question, and if you have time, I just want you to try it using functions. Okay, just read through the question, try to solve it, and try to use functions to solve it. I will go over the question and the solution next time. And if there's no more questions about the basics of functions, we'll move on to a new topic. Is that okay?
Yes, ma'am. The students are fine with it.
Okay. So now we're going to start with something called recursion. Okay. So recursion is kind of a combination of looping and functions. Okay. And let me just show you this diagram first. Okay. Sorry. So in this diagram, you can see, so this is kind of just like a simple diagram to explain how the flow of execution works for a function call, okay? So let's say we have 3 lines of code, okay? Line 1, line 2, and line 3. And line 1 calls some function, okay? It doesn't matter what function. And this represents my function execution, okay? There may be as many statements as I want within that function. That's not the point right now, okay? So what happens in the flow of execution is my first line executes, it calls this function, okay? So my execution, my cursor, think of it as a cursor, comes up here, okay? It comes up to my function execution. It executes all the lines in that function or whatever lines it has to, and it returns some value or it prints some statement, whatever. That's not important. It finishes function execution and it exits the function, and just follow this arrow. Function end comes to line 2. Okay, the next line, the one after the function call. And then the rest of the program executes as normal, okay? Just line 2, line 3, and so on. So what I'm trying to show you here is that when you have line 1, line 2, line 3 with a function call in the middle, if until this function execution is completed, line 2 won't be executed, okay, if line 1 calls a function. So can you all understand this diagram? Okay, I'm going to hope that you can. And the reason I'm showing you this is because it's really important to understand recursion, okay, to understand the exact flow of execution. So this is a recursive example, and it's basically a function that's calling itself. So until now, we only had examples like this, right, where we have some function, add, for example, and we're calling that function somewhere outside the function, and then we're executing it once, printing some result or using some return value, whatever. We're basically calling the function only from some other line, which is outside the function. Here in recursion, we're calling this function from within the function, okay? So the function is calling or invoking itself. So for this example, let me run it for you. So this will print iteration 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. It will execute this print statement, okay? So this line is the first call to the function, okay? This part is not a recursive call because this line is outside my function. But this line calling the function from within the function is called a recursive call, okay? And you use recursion kind of as an alternative way of iterating through something, okay? So if you have a question that is solved using iteration, you can use recursion also to solve that same question. And the opposite is also true, okay? So for the examples that we will be seeing in recursion, these are going to be really simple programs. So you may not really understand the point of using recursion, but for more complex examples, recursion becomes really useful, okay? So this is a recursive call. So in my first function call, I'm calling recursive example with the value 5, okay? And here I have something, if I is equal to 0, return, okay? So this is called a base case in the recursive function, or a halting condition, okay? Or a stopping condition, whatever you want to call it. It's most commonly called a base case. And this is similar to the stopping condition in a for loop or a while loop. So let me comment this out and show you what happens. So it's going to just keep on executing from 5, just reducing by 1 each time. And at the end, my system is going to run out of space, okay? So it will say maximum recursion depth exceeded. So not having this base case is similar to having an infinite loop, okay? In your regular iteration. So when you have recursion, you have to remember that you always need to have some base case, some stopping condition, okay? And here I'm just saying return because I'm not actually doing any computation. I'm just printing iteration 1 to 5, okay? And let me just go through these iterations one by one. So I'm saying I is equal to 5 in my first iteration, okay? I is not 0, so I print iteration and I print I. So iteration 5, okay, that's this line. And then I call this same function with I minus 1. So I call recursive example of 5 minus 1, which is 4, okay? So now in my second iteration or function call, I is equal to 4 this time, and I just repeat the same process. I print iteration 4, and this time I call a recursive example with 4 minus 1. And I keep repeating that. Finally, I call recursive example with 1 minus 1 when I is 1, which is 0. And in my sixth function call, I is 0, so it just returns, okay? And in my flow of execution diagram that I showed you here, when it returns, it will come to the next line after the function call. So there's no other line within my function, right? So it will just go back to the previous function call, to the point that called this function, okay? Which is this in this case, this line, okay? So because I don't have any more code within my function after my recursive function call, it's just going to keep moving back to the previous function that called it, okay? Is this much clear? Are there any questions about recursion so far? If there are not, then I will show you what happens if I interchange these two lines, okay? So now I have recursive example, this function called recursive function call first, and then I have my print statement. So now you can see it's printing them in the opposite order. So earlier it was going from 5 to 1. Now it's going from 1 to 5. Okay. So this is again where this flow of execution is important to remember. Okay. I think I have an example. Yeah. So let's see this case. Okay. Look at the second commit. Let me move this down. Okay. So if you look at this, in my first function call, it's the same as before. I'm saying call recursive example of 5, okay, the first time, and then I is not equal to 0. So now I come here. But instead of printing iteration, I have one more recursive function call, okay? So after setting I is equal to 5 in my first call, I call my function again. I call RE, recursive example, with 5 minus 1, okay, I minus 1, okay? And this does not get executed yet, okay? Print iteration I is kind of in our backlog. Think of it like that. It's not executed yet, okay? So we've called recursive example with 4. So now my second recursive call or my second function call executes, okay? So now I is equal to 4, and again I is not 0. So recursive example of 4 minus 1. Again, I'm adding this to my backlog kind of, and I'm calling my same function again with 3. Okay, so I'm repeating this. Now I have in my base case, I is equal to 0, so I return, okay? And now I come back to these print statements which were added to my backlog, okay? So in my flow of execution, this, when my I is equal to 1, 1 minus 1 is 0. So this had return, right? This sixth function call returns to this point, okay, to where the semicolon is. And then I print iteration 1, okay? And then I return to my fourth function call, to where my cursor is right now, okay? And then I print iteration 2, and so on, okay? Okay, I think we're out of time.